Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm happy to be with you one more time. This is a broadcast or a recording about Vedic astrology, how what the planets are doing right now, and also what they mean in terms of the world as a whole. So let's see now. So we did have a couple of changes this past week, which I'll talk about in terms of sign alignment or planetary movement. Also, if you would like to study astrology with me, or you would like to learn more about how astrology works by having your own chart done, or by having different discussions with me, you're more than welcome to come on the show. And also, you are more than welcome to contact me to have a reading done of your birth chart. My phone number, which is the best way to contact me, you can text me at that number. It is 508 525 0001. Again, that's 508 525 0001. You can also contact me at GaryGomesG@gmail.com. Those are the two easiest ways to get me. Um, and I can you can contact me through WhatsApp at that phone number, or also through Facebook or Instagram. Although I check um, the Facebook page, I check less frequently. Not with Facebook, but Messenger, I check less frequently than I do these other sources. So WhatsApp, texting, or email are more reliable ways to get in touch with me. The first thing I want to discuss, just to get the discussion rolling for this week, is that we do have a new candidate for vice president in the race, a major party candidate, and that's Tim Walz. Tim's chart is going to be really the most cursory kind of mention, because I don't have his birth time, and I haven't found it anywhere online yet. So those are always a little bit tricky to particularly accurately predict, excuse me. But he does have certain similarities with Kamala. The one thing I did notice, by the way, is although they look very different, they're the same age. So that means they were both born in the year of the dragon, which would indicate a certain degree of compatibility in terms of their viewpoints on things. This is also the year of the dragon, and generally speaking, the dragon year is full of ups and downs for dragons. Just in general, it's considered one of the luckier years in Chinese astrology. I know we're not talking about Chinese astrology particularly, but it's considered one of the luckier years in Chinese astrology. But this is the luck is variable. There's a lot of fire energy in the chart right now, which is why I think they're doing so well in terms of polling and things like that, in terms of publicity. And there are certain things that Walz actually does help complement Kamala on, and that is his sun is right up here. His sun and his Mars are heading towards their own sign and exaltation in Aries. He's got Jupiter in Aries and Mercury in Aries in his birth chart. Venus is in its own sign, so that's considered to be very good. So his sun is stronger, Venus is stronger, and Jupiter is, um, I would say, is stronger, um, if only because it's in the second house from the sun. Now, I don't know whether or not that translates positively to his birth chart because, as I said, I don't have the actual rising sign. His moon is in Capricorn. He's in the last stages of a 7.5 year period of Saturn. That can give an elevation of power to a person. It can also destroy them. So that's something that you have to be really, really careful about when you're looking at these charts, especially when you're using gross measures like this. His Mahadashas, which are very rough, they're not accurate at all, indicate he's in a Saturn-Venus subperiod. Unless his moon sign changes radically, he's probably definitely going to be in a Saturn Mahadasha. And Saturn's placed in the 12th house from the sun, but again, we don't know the rest of his chart, so we don't know whether or not that means he's going to actually succeed or not. He was in a Jupiter Mahadasha before then. The thing about the state he comes from, Minnesota is actually, I know a little bit about the history of Minnesota. Minnesota is actually the Democratic Party in Minnesota was actually a socialist party before it reformed. So Hubert Humphrey also, it's interesting in that we have a lot of parallels between the 1968 election, which I've spoken about a lot, and this election. So Hubert Humphrey, the vice president who took over for Lyndon Johnson in terms of running in 1968, in terms of running for president, came from Minnesota. He was known as a happy warrior, but Minnesota has always been what I would call a left-leaning state. I come from Massachusetts. Massachusetts has had that reputation since the 1960s when Kennedy ran, but before that it wasn't. Minnesota was. Minnesota always was. So a lot of Republicans came out of Massachusetts. We've had a lot of Republican governors. Minnesota doesn't share that trait with us. And also, so I don't want to make it too much about us, but essentially both California and Massachusetts, which are considered probably the two of the most liberal states in the country right now. Maryland's probably in line for that as well. Minnesota is essentially it's essentially pretty much it's been consistently a liberal state for decades, for at least I would say at least 80 years at the very least. Maybe even going back to the 1930s. And it's not surprising that she would pick somebody from a state that would complement that would placate the more progressive wing of her party. His Rahu is in the same sign as Kamala Harris's is, and it's not surprising because they were born the same year as Saturn's in the same sign. So they do have shared goals, definitely have shared goals. K2 is in the same sign. The only difficulty with this birth chart is that K2's in the first house in Sag, Rahu's in the seventh house in Gemini and Sagittarius, Rahu's in the seventh house in Gemini, and Mars also aspects Rahu. So I think in some ways that may hurt them in terms of the United States chart. I'm not sure because essentially the United States chart has Rahu in an angle right now. In the birth chart, it has Rahu in this sign in Cancer. So it's really going to be interesting. So I won't spend a lot of time on this chart until I have a more accurate birth time. He's in a Saturn-Venus subparade. Venus is in Taurus. Kamala's Venus is in Leo. But it does make up for the sun. So at least it does strengthen her very weak sun in the chart. And Jupiter, at least it appears to strengthen her fairly weak Jupiter. So it was a good choice from a strategic position. I think the problem is what we're seeing with Walz right now is there wasn't a lot of, so they go through a process of candidates with vetting, and it doesn't look like he was carefully vetted. So there are things that are popping up right now about him, which the Republican Party can use to attack him. But I'm not ignoring the polling, but the polling that's been going on. But over around August 7th, which was close to when this decision was made, Mercury went retrograde, and that usually means that people have to either reconsider their choices or reconsider their options. And if we look at what's happening with, just go to Kamala Harris' chart for a second. I want to start off with this just really quickly, not really spend a lot of time on it. So I apologize. I apologize if I am. Kamala Harris is in a sun subperiod, and she'll be in a more exposed subperiod really until around October 2nd. Her moon subperiod looks very good. If I'm honest about it. But her sun subperiod looks dreadful in both the birth chart, the Navamsha chart, and I would even say the Dasamsha chart. The moon is exalted in the 12th house in the Dasamsha chart, which is the chart of career, but that's the 12th house of loss. So it disposes to Venus, so again, this is one of those things where I'm looking, and Saturn aspects the moon, that's going to give a lot of charisma to a person. Saturn aspects the moon in her birth chart. Saturn aspects the moon in her Navamsha chart. But it's a retrograde Saturn. Retrogrades are powerful, but they also give setbacks. And I think after August 7th, there have been more and more questions about why she's not facing interviewing, having interviews done. There was a debate about whether or not, or there was a discussion about whether or not she would debate former President Trump, and Trump muddied the waters with that by saying he wanted to do it under his conditions because he met Biden on the conditions that Biden said. But I think, excuse me, it'll be interesting to see what is happening right now. I'm just going to put Trump's chart up quickly. Folks, My apologies. So Dell has Jupiter K2 subperiod happening, uh, for Venus happening between October 1st and the election, and let's go to 4 levels because Venus subperiods tend to be long. See what's happening in October. He enters a moon subperiod, and moon is debilitated in his birth chart, so that's not good. But it's fairly strong in his Navamsha chart, and fairly strong in his. It's a full moon throughout the charts. So is Kamala's. So that's why this is so tough to call. Kamala's moon is stronger, if I'm honest. Um, Trump's Venus subperiod, at least in terms of the Navamsha chart, is more competitive. So in the end, and let's see what Mercury looks like for them both, because that's the communications planet. Mercury is pretty well placed, yeah, between August 12th and October 1st. Is Venus subperiod is was born on a day connected with Venus. Let me just see now. So Venus, Saturn. Oh, I don't look back to 2016. Saturn's by far his weakest planet, by the way. Walz. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, folks. I went back a little bit too far. 2016. He was in a Rahu Mars Mahadasha when he won. Maybe if I didn't get this to behave itself. Okay, stop it. Yikes. Okay, so over here, all right. So he was in 2015. He was in a very favorable Mahadasha, Rahu Mars. Um, Mars is in his first house. Fifth house, let's see, Kamala's chart. Just see now, 2015 to 2016. And a second. I'll get away from this. Kamala's chart. Yes, and Rahu Venus, which is a very favorable subperiod for her too, but Venus is in the third house. I'm not sure how favorable that will be in terms of the chart. Um, yeah, it's a Dustana house. Venus is in a Dustana house. So it means struggles, it means desires, but also struggles. And there's no guarantee that a Dustana house will produce good results. Again, Trump's subperiod Lord is in a Dustana house. 12th is generally considered worse than the third, though. So we'll see what happens. This is one of those weird periods in time where we have If we look carefully at the charts, and I want to see if I can pull the eclipse chart. This will be really important for the outcome. And I'm doing this approximately just to give you an idea. So I'm just going to be Washington, D.C. No, it should be more precise than this, and I apologize for that. Okay, so the eclipse will happen in Trump's second house, but Jupiter's aspecting that second house. It'll happen in Kamala's fourth house, which is a house of kingship or position. Okay, so and there'll be a Mars aspect in that house. So this is really one of the tougher elections for me to judge. The 2016 election was really definitely difficult for me to judge as well. But like I said, I still give, based upon everything I've seen from the charts, is still, this election is built upon, especially the candidacy of, of Harris is built on air. It's not really built on substance. Now, in some ways, that doesn't matter at all because perceptions are everything in politics, but um, I do think she's going to make some major blunders over the next month, and that'll make an impression. But it will be tight. And let me just see now. And I think one of the things that, in some ways, this parallels the 1968 election is that you have one candidate who's essentially acting very happy and so that's Harris. Harris is going around like a Hubert Humphrey type and essentially actually taking a couple of positions like Humphrey took towards the end of his candidacy, like he was um trying not to subvert what Johnson was doing, but he also promised to seek a more aggressive peace to end the Vietnam War. And Harris seems to be doing something similar. And we had in Trump and Nixon similar personalities that were essentially saying there's a lack of law and order in the country. This is very general. Now, thematically, and the United States was in a nodal cycle then, but a more disruptive nodal dasha at that time. So that was K2. K2 is more disruptive, more dissembling than Rahu is. But Rahu is revolt. Rahu is connected with the revolution. So that's why I'm saying it could go either way, because Rahu is going to be more inclined towards symbolism or giving underrepresented groups a chance or trying to, but it also tends to endorse tends to upset the status quo. So again, this is still very tough for me to call. If we look at this eclipse chart, though, there's going to be a major disruption in October. A, a major, maybe even earlier, maybe even late September. And the main reason I'm saying that is because the eclipse patterns are in the fourth house of the United States and in the 10th house of the United States. So I'm hoping that we don't get any new diseases or new epidemics or new war outbreaks. But there is some concern that I have about assassination attempts, further assassination attempts, and also about disruptions, civil strife. We're seeing it now in England right now. So let's go to the basic map of what's happening right now. So the UK is already experiencing massive disruption, and it's largely based around false information about the nature of the person who killed the young person. But there have been cases earlier in the UK in which there have been deaths or confrontations or fights with immigrant populations. And a lot of these things don't just boil to the surface because one act happens. The George Floyd situation didn't come together just because one person was killed. A lot of these incidents, or a lot of these incidents happen as they'll hit a breaking point, and the tension will mount, and essentially you have a point where certain people, rightly or wrongly, just decide they've had enough and they decide to break out in riots. So this is not, this has happened before in England, okay? So just to be clear, this isn't a new phenomenon in England. This is not a new phenomenon. It will not be a new phenomenon for the United States if it does happen. Because we had the OJ, the Rodney King incident causing riots in Los Angeles in the early 1990s, which is another very similar period to what we're going through right now. And so a lot of these things there's a variety of factors, a variety of social and political factors which are leading to this particular situation. The immigration rate in England has been higher than the immigration rate into the United States. As a matter of fact, throughout most of Western Europe, it's been higher proportionally because the populations of those countries are much smaller, and the rate has increased quite a bit. So I'm not talking about the internal policies of those countries. I'm just saying that this is something which is it's a complicated matter. I'm not qualified to talk about it from a political perspective. But from an astrological perspective, I've been saying that there were going to be backs against the high level of immigration into Europe. This is a manifestation of that. So it's not just based around the murder, and it's not just based around a case of mistaken identity. It's something that's been building up for a while. And likewise, the resentment that groups in England feel as well, in uh, immigrant groups in England feel about being attacked or being penalized. Uh, that's also popping up as well. So if we look at the chart, what can we say? Well, we have Mars aspecting Mercury and Venus. Mercury is retrograde. So that means communications over the next 3 weeks are going to be horribly distorted. Um, Mercury retrograde is kind of an interesting phenomenon because it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't, that things will get screwed up or that things will fail. It does mean, however, that communications are misunderstood. There have to be several attempts to make meaningful communications, and there usually have to be several tries to get things right. And even then, it becomes more clear-headed and more obvious after Mercury turns direct. There'll be, I never used to pay attention to this, but there's about a 3-week correction period in terms of Mercury. So around August, clearing up the communications that got followed up during the Mercury retrograde period. So it's around a 3-week window before Mercury retrograde and a 3-week window after Mercury retrograde in which communications are screwy. And that's what we're going to see between roughly, we start starting around mid-July, and it'll go all the way until around mid-September. Okay. So just be prepared that communications will not flow smoothly during this period. Of course, it's also aspecting Mercury, so people are lying perpetually. They're lying for political advantage. They're even lying in relationships. There's a lot of anger building up in relationships and a lot of feelings of oppression in relationships and in communications. So a lot of countries are blaming media for what's happening right now. I don't think they're entirely incorrect, but the answer is, at least from certain quarters, to suppress media, to essentially stop communication from occurring because they blame it on media. And it's really not media itself, it's the manipulation of media. Sun is in Cancer. That's kind of an emotional time. Moon is in Libra, but Jupiter is also aspecting K2. The Jupiter-Mars conjunction aspecting K2 is really a violent kind of a situation. So that's something we have to watch out for. There was that horrific plane crash I saw in Brazil last week. That's the Saturn and Aquarius happening. And also, the other thing is that Jupiter and Mars are almost exactly on top of each other. That'll happen within about a week. And again, the feeling of righteous indignation is usually very strong when Jupiter and Mars are in conjunction. Right now, Mars is almost defeating Jupiter in planetary war. Okay. And we'll see it within about a week or so. It will be defeating. So Jupiter, so the better judgment parts of our personalities will be gone. The other thing is, if we have any indications of the chart, the economy will continue to be in a bit of trouble over the next 6 weeks or so, mainly because of the Mercury retrograde, Mars aspecting Mercury, Mars aspecting Venus, and also Saturn aspecting Venus. Okay, so don't be surprised if you see stock markets. There has been a slight uptick or a slight let me correct that, a slight slowdown in the growth of jobs and a slight, if I recall correctly, a slight increase in the unemployment rate. The Federal Reserve has not lowered rates as the markets thought they did. So that's important because that actually helps stimulate the economy. When they lower rates, people will feel more inclined to homes or take chances on that. Property inventories are very scant in the United States. Properties become kind of expensive to buy all around the world. And that will be also, I think, a factor in the upcoming election. But just in the short term, this feeling of that we're heading backwards economically as opposed to forwards economically will continue for about the next 6 to 7 weeks, maybe even into October. And again, there'll be more scandals exposed inside the governments of the world over the next few weeks in particular. So this will be kind of interesting because the sun will be aspected by Mars. I'm very afraid of people trying to start wars or inflame wars for political gain over the next few weeks. And also, if we're looking at protesters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This hasn't necessarily, the selection of Walz hasn't necessarily calmed down the element of protest in the Democratic Party. So these are all factors that I'm kind of factoring in to so I'm kind of modifying my judgment. So it's not really just a comparison of the two charts and which chart is more favorable and not more favorable. It's also a comparison against the background that's going on right now. So let's go ahead to look at the individual charts for this month. Oh, by the way, we saw big earthquakes in Japan. I thought it was going to be a government scandal. I was wrong about that. And it was a threatened terrorist attack on a Taylor Swift concert. I thought that something was going to happen in the Paris Olympics. I'm still very much afraid of that, or of some kind of big terrorist attack happening, or a terrorist attack against the government happening over the next few weeks. So we have about another week before Sun goes into Leo, and I'm very concerned about that. Okay, so again, we're going to be entering a period where I think violence is going to be prevalent. You'll also see the government's taking a lot of harsh actions to suppress violence. So that'll happen after mid-August. So let's go over here. Disease, I saw one of my colleagues predict another pandemic. I'm not really ready just yet. Saturn Rahu conjunction, maybe next year, but I hope not. Let's see now. So let's look at Aries. So that'll be around April of next year if that does come. It may come a little bit earlier, it may come a little bit later. So let's look carefully at the chart for Aries. Aries has Mars and Jupiter in the second house, so it's very focused on money, very focused on status and control. And overall, not bad for investing for the sign, but it will tend to be worried about keeping its investments. Prone to illnesses, and there'll be some psychological issues with wives and relationship partners in general, business partners in general. Saturn is aspecting the first house, so this sign will feel kind of restrained. And again, there'll be a tendency towards over expenditure. That hasn't changed. For Taurus, Taurus has Mars and Jupiter in the first house, and is the Arada for Mars, which I haven't spoken about very much, but that kind of puts almost like a double Mars in the first house. So again, this sign will be very aggravated and very upset with relationship life, and also, but also getting some gains and getting some fame and notoriety. Mercury's in the second house, in the fourth house, so his speech will be very easily misunderstood. But there is a good conjunction between Mercury and Venus over the next week, so that's actually good for wealth and prosperity for this sign. Sixth house has Moon in it, so this sign has to watch out for stomach illnesses. And as a matter of fact, there's that new, it's not new, it's been out for a while, for about the past year or so, a stomach virus. And I think I've had it a couple of times, and I think my wife has had it a couple of times. So essentially that virus will not go away anytime soon. The Saturn aspect of the seventh house makes it difficult for relationship partners to get along with this sign. And Saturn's aspecting Venus, which is Lord of the first house. So relationship life will be damaged this month for a Taurus. And that's May 15th to June 15th in the Vedic chart. For Gemini, Gemini has at least some potential for gains, financial growth, especially with the moon in this house. And also with Mercury in the third, moving backwards to the second, and in conjunction with Venus. Moon is in the fifth house, that's good. Ketu's in the fourth, so there can be some threats or some feelings of insecurity for this sign. Saturn's in the ninth house. Some opportunities that you thought were gone are now presented again. In the 10th house, good for career life, good for career growth. With Gemini, this sign will have to watch out for what we call overindulgence, because the Lord of second house is in the fifth house of connected with the stomach. So you'll have to watch out for eating too much and possibly putting on weight. It won't last long, but just be a little bit aware of that. Overall, again, heavy expenditure pattern has indicated some problems with career at the outside. And for those of you who have other charts, it may even vanish towards mid-August. For Cancer, Cancer has good signs of prosperity in the second house, a lot of courage, a lot of emotional instability, though, to be honest with you. And also Saturn in the eighth house. So again, a restructuring of life pattern, a restructuring of what you would expect out of life. Rahu's in the ninth house. So again, there will be gains, but they won't be sustainable. I always look at Rahu and I say, well, so a lot of big promises are going to be made, but they can't be kept. And that hasn't disappointed me yet. A lot of Vedic astrologers use that as a marriage indicator. I view it as almost an indicator of expecting things to go too well in relationships. So if you're interested in somebody relationship-wise, especially if you're Virgo or Pisces, Sun or rising, I'd avoid it for now. But even Gemini and Sagittarius, it's the world is a world of illusion right now. It's not really a real world. So I'm discouraging people from getting involved in new relationships right now, unless they have certain special combinations in their birth chart. For this sign, so Cancer does give some career growth, it gives some career velocity, but like I said, promises will be made by higher ups, which really cannot be kept. For Leo, Leo has Venus in the first house, good for career. Jupiter's and Mars are in the 10th house, very good for career growth for this sign. K2's in the second house. This sign will have some difficulty in making itself understood. Moon is in the third house. There'll be some change in desires or ambitions for this sign. Saturn's in the seventh. That tends to make people feel like they're a little bit stuck or a little bit tied down in relationships. There may be some visitation of past relationships because of this combination. Rahu's in the eighth. Again, there's a lot of behind the scenes trickery happening for this particular sign. Mars and Jupiter. So let's go back to Donald Trump for a second. Trials may be brought out again, or maybe even if he does win, they'll try to figure out some way to take the election away from him. And that's already being discussed. So that's in the back burner right now. Let's see now. So for Leo, so he's a Leo rising. That's why I mentioned it. But for Leo risings in general, for essentially conspiracies to steal your money, or else conspiracies to keep you a lot of work effort, definitely a lot of luck from that, but also behind the scenes, watch out for people behind the scenes telling you what you want to hear and then plotting against you. It's not to make Leos paranoid, it's just really what I see in the chart. For K2, for the Virgo and K2, very intuitive sign, very good combination for intuition, but not good for memory and also not good for stomach ailments. That's increased by Saturn being in the sixth house. Moon's in the second house. This sign can't overeat this week. And Rahu's in the seventh house. So again, be careful about relationship expectations. Mars, Jupiter are in the ninth house. And, and Sun's in the 11th house. So that should be good for financial gains. One thing I didn't mention for Leo, let me go back to Leo for a second. Yeah, there'll be a lot of expenses over the next week for Leo, but then a lot of gain of power for Leo towards the end, towards next week. So we'll talk about that then. For Virgo, again, good for money temporarily. Saturn's in the sixth, a lot of opponents to overcome. But Mars and Jupiter in the ninth is basically a good placement. And Sun in the 11th is good for financial gains. Mercury and Venus in the 12th aren't all that bad because they can give wealth from unexpected sources. For Libra, this is October 15th to November 15th. Let's see now. Moon is in the first house, so there'll be like a spotlight on this particular sign. It'll show a lot of gains up until around, I would say around early September. And let's see now. And Mercury will go into the 11th house, so it'll show financial gains, but not personal luck. So Venus will be in the same sign with K2. That can indicate allies turning against you. Career life is very strong though this week for this particular sign. For, and this is Kamala Harris's rising sun sign, excuse me. Saturn is in the fifth house, which is considered to be a very lucky position. Although Saturn does give some humiliation or some problems. And Saturn's aspecting Venus, Mercury in the 11th house, which is a Raj Yoga combination. It's a great Raj Yoga combination, but Saturn is still Saturn, so it'll make a person work hard. And Mercury is about to change signs within about a week. And Venus is about to change signs within about 3 weeks. So this won't last. So take advantage of this while you can. For Jupiter and Mars are in the 8th house. He gives a lot of support from hidden people. Rahu's in the 6th. Jupiter and Sun are in the 10th. I'm sorry, the Sun's in the 10th house. So overall, it looks good for career, at least for the next week or so. For Scorpio, Scorpio has no planets in the first house. We have an arid of the Venus in the first house. Mars, Jupiter are in the 7th house, so that can give an overly sexual orientation of the sign, relationships based upon sexual attraction, which is not really necessarily a bad thing, but they usually aren't durable. Saturn's in the 4th house, excuse me, and Rahu's in the 5th. So again, some good temporary luck, but some problems in relationships, increased fights in relationships. Good for luck in career. Sun and Mercury and Venus are all well placed for career luck. But again, you can't watch out for your friends, or you can't trust your friends all that much. For Sagittarius, the reason I keep saying that week after week is because these K2 takes a long time to move through a sign. And it'll stay in that sign until around May of next year. For Sagittarius, Sagittarius has Saturn in the 3rd house, good for fulfillment of ambitions. Rahu's in the 4th house. That's good for financial gains. Jupiter and Mars in the 6th house can make you a little bit argumentative or fight seeking over the next few weeks. That can be a downfall. That can be a problem for you. Sun is in the 8th house. Again, not good for confidence. Confidence will improve within about 3 weeks, or within about a week, excuse me. And Venus is in the 9th house along with Mercury. That's good for financial gains, short-term financial gains, but neither of them are in the friendly sign. K2's in the 10th, lack of direction about the future for this particular sign. Moon's in the 11th, friends are fickle. And so what I mean by that is friends will not necessarily stab you in the back. It's not quite as devious as K2 in the 11th house, but it does indicate that friends will be fleeting or alliances will be fleeting. Or Capricorn. Capricorn's Lord Saturn is in the 2nd house, and Rahu's in the 3rd, so it gives good potential for financial gain for this chart, for this sign. Although you may have to go through several financial losses in order to achieve that. And Jupiter and Mars are in the 5th house. That's generally good, but not so good for earthquakes, as we saw in Japan and as we saw in California. And I'm going to go out on the limb and say those areas are still in great danger. Mars and Jupiter, especially over the next few weeks. Let me see now. Mars and Jupiter are in Earth signs. Capricorn has no planets in it, so at least one Earth sign is safe. But this will tend to give problems with earthquakes and volcanoes and those kinds of things and even crashes. So that Saturn in Aquarius is almost a stereotypical plane crash combination, but the Jupiter and Mars combination in this sign isn't good either. And let me just go over here. So Capricorn overall has to be mindful of accidents, arguments, those kinds of things. For Pisces, I'm sorry, for Aquarius, let's go to Aquarius first before we jump to Pisces. Saturn's in the first house. The sign gets a lot of kingly authority in this sign, but it can't hold on to it. Actually, this sign doesn't like kings very much. It doesn't like authority figures very much. Good potential for relationship life, although it's fleeting. And again, there may be pursuing of relationship partners who had once been of interest, then weren't of interest, and now are of interest again. So you have to watch out for this, especially because Mars is aspecting Mercury. So individuals may be doing this in order to either make you think there's a chance of some kind of relationship life, or hold out some kind of promise for romance, but they really don't mean it. So just be a little bit careful about that. And the sun in the sixth house, Lord of the seventh and the sixth, indicates fights or arguments with a relationship partner. K2 in the eighth, hidden intrigues, disruptions threatening success in life. Moon is in the ninth house, which indicates a change of luck for the sign over the next few days. So that's actually basically pretty good for Aquarius, but relationship life, I don't trust for any sign, but particularly true of Aquarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Sagittarius. For also Leo, most signs are hurting relationship-wise. And I said Scorpio before too, didn't I? So it's really not the best time to enter into new relationships this month. Pisces has Jupiter in the third house, so good for financial gain of land. The sun is in the fifth house, good for financial growth with effort. Venus and Mercury are in the sixth house, so it's a little bit difficult for financial progress. K2's in the seventh, not really good for relationship life. Moon's in the eighth. There'll be a lot of anxiety about romantic relationships and children. And finally, Saturn's in the 12th house. So again, this is that heavy expenditure pattern. Now, let's take a break and look at the lunar map. Look at the astral map, not the lunar map, but the astral cartography. All right, so this is a little clearer. So more land fraud in Hawaii and Alaska. That's continuing on, unfortunately. And let's see, let's go over to California. We have a Rahu line passing through California, also through Washington State, Oregon, and parts of Nevada. So these are going to be what I would call panic zones, or worries about some scandals, but also worries about some fear, especially connected with this part of the country. Okay. So that's in keeping with the earthquakes which have just occurred, but it's also in keeping with a lot of fears about scandals that are happening in government, in local government. This is a moon line running through down here. This could indicate some flooding up from Wisconsin down through Minnesota, down to Michigan, down through Oklahoma, down to eastern Texas, and all the way down through Mexico. We have a sun line running through New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and close to the Bahamas and Cuba and down into Panama and in Ecuador. So this indicates to me increased governmental control or governmental mandates. Mercury is passing close to New England, but not quite there yet, and down to Puerto Rico. So there will be some reversals, or people will lose positions in those states. And it'll hit in Guyana, Venezuela, and in Brazil, down into Bolivia, and all the way down into not Argentina, Argentina. And that Mercury-Venus line, again, this is flooding, this is problems with rain. This is also bad communications or disrupted communications, and maybe even some problems with the Falklands again. I'm not sure about that. Jupiter is running through a Mars line off the coast of Guyana and off the coast of Brazil. So there may be some violence in Brazil over the next few weeks. I hope not. Uh, Whenever I say those things, I always say a prayer that it doesn't happen. Flooding in West Africa, it looks like um, maybe even change of governments around Morocco, Ivory Coast, and maybe even some change of government in Iceland, and maybe even in Ireland and UK, even though UK just went through its elections. Um, there are no violence lines coming through here, but I think one of the things that we have to look at is there were violence lines set up a few weeks ago, and sometimes these astrocartography readings don't hit exactly when they're scored. They hit a few weeks after. And we have the sun coming through Turkey, Libya, Sudan, and down into um, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and also a Mercury line. So we're going to get really bad communications and oppressive governmental policies in the former French colonies, and also down further south. The other thing is increased government oppression or government um, responsibility in Ukraine and Poland. It looks like finally we have a Saturn line. We have a Saturn, Mars, Jupiter line coming through Saudi Arabia, Turkey, along with the sun line. So Turkey is going to go through some disruptions in government. I hope no earthquakes, but the potential is there. And we'll see what happens there. There will be some governmental uprisings I don't think in Saudi Arabia, but down here and even down into Southeast Africa. And let's see now. There's a Saturn line going through the Ukraine. They just invaded Kursk in Russia. Ukraine just invaded Kursk in Russia. But overall, this combination indicates a lot of unhappiness to both Russia and Ukraine over the next few weeks. It's a Rahu line. There's a little bit of panic in Russia right now, and a little bit of panic in the United Arab Emirates and Iran. So it'll be interesting to see how. Oh, and there has been a change of leader in. I want to say it's in Bangladesh. I'm not sure about that. It's over here, and but the moon is going through Afghanistan and Pakistan and West India, excuse me. And that indicates a lot of flooding. And finally, we have a sun line going through um, Southeast Asia, especially Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, close to Vietnam, and a line going through China, excuse me, from Mars and Jupiter. So along with a Mercury line. So there'll be increased news about government uh, dominance or control. Let's go over here. And that's the same will be true in the Philippines and actually even in Indonesia and Australia. That indicates Australia will be an increasingly censorious nation, as Canada is, by the way. So there's a sun line running through Canada right now. Saturn is passing close to Korea and close to Japan. Japan just went through those relatively large earthquakes, or very large earthquakes, 7.1 was one. And this is a potential earthquake zone over here, but Saturn will give some destruction or some panic because of Rahu and Saturn. Guinea and both East and West Guinea, okay? And also all the way down through Middle Australia. In government in New Zealand, although that's really sort of like become almost like a stereotypical sign over the or pattern over the past few months, but that's true nonetheless. So that's it for this week. The spots I look for trouble in are California, Texas, Mexico, up through Canada, Canada through Pennsylvania, Virginia, and even some violence and scandal in South America, large swaths of South America, flooding in Iceland or disruption, and maybe even hitting Norway and Sweden as well. So you may even see more riots break out in other countries across Europe, connected with things like immigration um, or displeasure with the government. Finally, Turkey's under several afflictions, but so is Eastern Europe this month. That doesn't necessarily mean anything bad is going to happen to them, but it's an indicator. And Egypt has some problems as well. Finally, the area that I look for next most would be this region of the map, which is Saudi Arabia through Pakistan and Afghanistan and all the way to India. And finally, some violence in China, Philippines, Indonesia, and Australia, and some panic in Japan, and maybe even in Korea. So again, keep in mind, these are just opportunities to face as we encounter more growth and more possibilities. There are always possibilities for you out in the world, especially for people who want to work hard right now. There are tremendous possibilities. So over the next 4 to 5 months, it may not be immediate rewards, but over the next 4 to 5 months, you're going to see a lot of possibilities for growth. And that's about it for this week. I love you all. Please subscribe, like, and discuss and share with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you next week. I love you all again. and take care out there. Don't worry about things. Things will essentially shake themselves out. Okay? Bye, everyone. See you next week. And thank you for watching.